No one ever told you, but the market doesn't reward those who follow rules. It pays dearly for those who break standards. While you insist on hiding your flaws behind an impeccable persona, others are profiting precisely by showing what you're afraid to reveal. Carl Jung once said, "What you reject in yourself controls you." And in the business world, those who can't control their own shadows end up being controlled by those who have the courage to use them. The brutal truth is, conformity is on the way out. If your work can be copied, automated, or outsourced, the market will discard you without remorse. But if you become irreplaceable, because you've built value on your authenticity, your history, your archetypes, you don't compete on price, you set the price. And whoever sets the price rules the game. Look around. How many are struggling to appear perfect professionals, speaking the same rigid language, repeating the same motivational litany? Now compare that to the few who have decided to embrace their true voice, their failures, their downfalls, and their rebuilding. These are the ones who attract loyal clients, attentive investors, and entire communities. Not because they are saints, but because they are rare. And in capitalism, the rare is worth more than the common. You may have diplomas, certifications, and titles, but none of that guarantees wealth if you're still playing the mask. What the market buys today is courage. The courage to be different, to integrate shadow work into practice, to transform pain into solutions and experiences into authority. Companies, followers, customers, everyone gravitates toward those who are real, not those who play roles. Persona is theater. Self is capital. This video won't teach you miracle formulas. It will show you 7 truths that shatter illusions and expose why the most profitable path is the most uncomfortable: being yourself. If you're ready to abandon the fantasy that authenticity is fragility, Jung has already left the signs. Now it's your turn to decide whether you'll continue being a copy or whether you'll transform your uniqueness into power and money. In a world saturated with copies and repetitive patterns, authenticity has become a rare currency, and those who understand this begin to see opportunities where others only see routine. Carl Jung once said that the soul cries out for true expression. And when the ego insists on adopting the same persona as everyone else, the result is invisibility. Think about the digital market, for example. How many identical profiles do you encounter every day, repeating pre-made phrases and copied strategies? Now compare them to those few who dare to show vulnerability, tell their stories, blend spirituality with business, shadow work with practical discipline. These people not only gain an audience, but also convert their uniqueness into income. What is rare has value, and what is unique creates magnetism. The question remains, how long will you hide behind the mask, waiting for the world to value your copy? Turning authenticity into currency doesn't mean exposing yourself unfiltered, but knowing how to use your archetypes strategically. Carl Jung showed us that each of us carries within us a gallery of symbolic characters: the hero, the sage, the lover, the rebel. What few realize is that when you recognize these archetypes, you can even apply them to your career. A lawyer who assumes the persona of the warrior conveys authority. An artist who embodies the archetype of the visionary awakens the desire to follow in their footsteps. It's not about inventing something, but about accessing what already exists within you and transforming it into a narrative, a product, and a service. And the irony is clear. What you spent years trying to hide may be precisely what the market pays most to hear. Practical examples of this are everywhere. Look at writers who never had formal academic training, but created best-selling works simply by sharing their pain. Or entrepreneurs who transformed their shyness into communication consulting, using shadow work as a foundation to teach others what once stifled them. Authenticity works because it connects deeply. No one can resist someone who has the courage to be human in public. This translates into business, relationships, and even finances. On YouTube, creators who speak about spirituality from their own existential crises are precisely the ones who go viral the most. The market doesn't just buy solutions, it buys truths told in a real way. But here's the detail that separates those who make money authentically from those who only dream: the courage to transform their inner selves into valuable tools. It's not enough to know about Carl Jung, ego, persona, or shadow work in theory. You need to translate this into practical language, into content that touches hearts, and into offerings that solve real problems. Imagine someone who spent years trapped in the good guy persona and now creates a course on emotional boundaries. This person not only teaches, but proves it by living example. Authenticity, in this sense, is the seal of guarantee that no diploma can offer. When you share your own journey, people recognize in you the guide they've been looking for. Authenticity, therefore, is more than a moral value. It is capital. And, like all capital, it can be invested, multiplied, and converted into concrete wealth. The attention economy doesn't reward those who shout the loudest, but those who speak what resonates as true. When your uniqueness is put into practice, it opens doors, creates opportunities, and transforms scarcity into abundance. And the key is understanding that being different isn't a risk, it's an asset. The closer you get to yourself, the further you become from the crowd. And it is in this space of difference that the next point begins. Carl Jung's archetypes, used not as distant theory, but as a practical strategy to create value and generate income. Carl Jung left us a powerful map: archetypes. They aren't just philosophical concepts tucked away in psychology books, but living tools that can be used to build brands, careers, and businesses. Each archetype represents a universal symbolic force: the hero, the rebel, the creator, the magician, the mother. When someone activates an archetype, it immediately resonates with people because it taps into the collective unconscious. And in the marketplace, resonance is synonymous with trust, and trust generates money. Think of the creator as Steve Jobs. His visionary persona didn't just sell gadgets, but a lifestyle. He didn't offer a cell phone, but an extension of the modern soul. This is what happens when the archetype ceases to be theory and becomes practice. Now, imagine someone who consciously chooses to work with the sage archetype. This archetype brings the magnetism of knowledge, spirituality, and depth. If you work as a therapist, mentor, or content producer, the sage can be your path to transforming information into value. People don't just pay for answers, they pay for the sense of clarity a true guide conveys. Carl Jung said the persona is just a social mask, but when you allow a deeper archetype to speak through you, the impact is visceral. People perceive something beyond appearance. They feel they are in the presence of someone who carries meaning. The interesting thing is that archetypes don't have to be used alone. You can combine them, create nuances, and play with layers of your own psyche. The rebel can be great for those who want to create disruptive businesses by questioning norms. The lover for those who work with relationships, fashion, or art. The magician for those who connect spirituality, ego, and shadow work into transformative experiences. And here's the practical play. Identify which archetype resonates most with you and align your communication, marketing, and even your products with it. This not only differentiates you in the market, but creates a magnetic identity. It's no coincidence that major global brands base entire campaigns on archetypes: Nike on the hero, Harley-Davidson on the rebel, Disney on the innocent. A practical example. Suppose you want to build authority as a content creator. If you choose the explorer archetype, your narrative might revolve around searching, risk-taking, and inner journeys. This attracts people who also want to break patterns. If you're the caregiver, you might build support products, courses on healing or shadow work, and your language will be compassionate and welcoming. And if you embrace the magician archetype, you can transform ordinary experiences into something extraordinary, connecting Jungian psychology and spirituality to concrete results in people's lives. The secret is simple. When the archetype is clear, money flows because the connection is direct with the unconscious. What Jung called archetypes, the market calls branding. But in essence, it's the same thing, using symbols to create impact and value. The difference is that instead of being manipulated by them, you can learn to use them consciously. And the most fascinating thing is that when you align your archetype with your authentic uniqueness, life ceases to be effort and becomes flow. The archetype becomes strategy, the persona becomes a vehicle, and the ego finds its place in the game. But for this gear to turn, you need to understand the process that Jung considered the most important of all: individuation, the path to becoming who you truly are. Carl Jung described individuation as a journey of integration, uniting ego, persona, and shadow until the self shines as the center of the psyche. It may seem like a distant philosophy, but in practice, it's a competitive advantage in any market. Think about it. While most people try to imitate trends, those who are individuating become trends. The process of individuation allows a person to not only know who they are, but also recognize their own limits, desires, and talents. This clarity eliminates wasted energy because you don't try to win games that don't belong to you. And in the business world, this focus is worth its weight in gold. Individuals who know themselves don't waste time on wars that have nothing to do with them, but instead put all their energy into what they were born to do. Consider the example of professionals who, instead of pursuing safe careers, decided to invest in what reflected their deepest identity. An architect who loves spirituality and applies Jungian principles to his projects creates houses that feel like temples of the soul, and therefore charges prices that a common architect could never achieve. This is the effect of individuation, transforming an inner calling into a unique value proposition. Jung said that the shadow contains everything we don't acknowledge within ourselves. When someone does shadow work, they discover hidden talents and transform them into a differentiator. The world rewards those who dare to reveal what was repressed. In practice, individuation generates magnetism because it creates congruence. A person in this process doesn't say one thing and live another. Their persona is simply an authentic reflection of what the self has already consolidated. This conveys silent authority. The public, clients, and partners feel trust without you having to beg for it. This is why so many forced businesses fail. They are sustained by masks, not essence. When the persona falls and the self emerges, the market recognizes real strength. And this converts into money because people pay to be around those who convey truth. Simple exercises can help you navigate this process. Write your own story, highlighting not only successes, but also failures and pain. Ask yourself, what have I learned that no one can take away from me? What were the moments when I felt my soul most alive? This exercise isn't just therapy, it's strategic career planning. A mentor who recognizes their existential void can create courses on spirituality and authenticity. An artist who embraces their dark side creates works that touch collective wounds. Individuation is like a lens that reveals the hidden value in common experiences, transforming them into a competitive advantage. The most impressive thing is that by becoming individual, you stop competing in the same arena as everyone else. You create your own. While others fight over scraps, you build a different feast because no one else can offer what only you have become. This is the power of the Jungian process applied to real life. It's not cheap self-help, but a survival strategy in an economy that rewards differentiation. And precisely for this reason, the next point becomes inevitable. Understanding the power of difference and why being the same is expensive, while being different pays infinite dividends. Carl Jung argued that individuation inevitably leads to separation from the masses, because being whole means not fitting into predefined molds. And it is precisely this separation that generates value. The ego seeks acceptance, the persona seeks approval, but the self demands difference. Think about today's market. Millions of people selling the same courses, posting the same videos, using the same phrases. The result? Invisibility. Now compare that to that creator who dares to blend spirituality with humor, shadow work with personal stories, archetypes with business. He draws attention because he breaks the mold. Difference is disturbing, but it also magnetizes. And in attention capitalism, being noticed is the first step to getting paid. Being different doesn't mean being purposelessly eccentric, but rather becoming a vivid contrast. A doctor who speaks of Carl Jung while seeing patients becomes unforgettable. An entrepreneur who uses archetypes to teach marketing stands out from all the generic coaches. The value lies precisely in not repeating the same formula everyone else repeats. Jung called this integrating the shadow, bringing to light what you hide for fear of rejection. But the market, ironically, rewards what you thought was a flaw. People pay not for your similarity, but for your contrast. No one wants more of the same. They want what only you can offer. Consider the case of artists who transformed pain into style. Frida Kahlo, for example, painted her own wounds and became a global icon. Jung would explain this by saying that she accessed her shadow and transformed it into symbolic expression. The same goes for business. Starbucks doesn't just sell coffee, it sells the archetypal experience of the third place, distinct from home and work. When you dare to be different, you create a category of your own. And those who create their own category never need to compete on price. They dictate the price. This is the simple logic. Common is cheap, rare is expensive. But here comes the challenge: fear. The ego fears rejection, the persona fears being unmasked, and so many prefer to remain the same, even knowing the cost. This is where shadow work becomes a practical tool. By looking within and recognizing the parts you hide, you discover where your originality lies. Practical exercise. Write down 3 things you avoid showing for fear of judgment. Now imagine how these 3 things could be transformed into a product, service, or content. You may discover that your greatest pain is also your greatest asset. And when this happens, difference ceases to be a burden and becomes currency. Ultimately, being different isn't a choice. It's destiny for those who want to live authentically. Jung said that an unfulfilled life cries out from the unconscious, and if you don't listen, it manifests itself in symptoms: anxiety, emptiness, boredom. These symptoms are signs that you're slowly killing yourself in the name of equality. The solution isn't to be just one more, but to be the only one. And it's at this point that the next inevitable question arises. How can we stop living the social mask, the persona, and start profiting by being real, aligned with the self that dwells within us? Carl Jung taught us that the persona is the mask we wear to be accepted, while the self is the totality of who we truly are. The problem is that many people spend their entire lives enslaved to the persona, that carefully constructed image to please their boss, family, friends, or followers. The ego loves this fantasy because it gives a sense of control. But here's the hard truth: masks don't sell in the long run. People may even be enchanted by a character for a while, but sooner or later they realize its lack of consistency. What generates lasting profit is aligning with the self, because authenticity resides within it. And in the marketplace, authenticity doesn't just connect, it builds loyalty. Look at the influencers who quickly exploded by pretending to be something they weren't. Some fell into oblivion, others became a joke. Now, look at those who, even with smaller followers, maintain a loyal following for years. The difference? They stopped playing up their persona and showed vulnerability, shadow, and genuine spirituality. And here's the practical takeaway. When you align with the self, you no longer need to waste energy maintaining a false image. The content flows, the work is no longer forced, and the audience notices. Jung said that the shadow needs to be integrated, and this applies to business as well. Showing who you really are is your greatest marketing strategy. A simple example. Imagine a therapist who hides their own emotional crises to appear perfect. Their persona may be attractive for a while, but it doesn't create deep trust. Now think of another therapist who embraces their pain, talks about how shadow work transformed their life, and shows that they're still in the process of individuation. Who do you think attracts more clients? The second, because they convey humanity and, paradoxically, authority. The self doesn't need to be perfect, it needs to be true. The self generates magnetism because it communicates that there's flesh, bone, and soul behind the words. The practical way to break free from your persona is simple, but it requires courage. First, list the roles you feel obligated to play. The good guy, the smart one, the spiritual one, the impeccable professional. Then ask yourself, who am I without these roles? This question is uncomfortable, but it's liberating. When your persona falls away, there's room to create businesses that reflect your personality, to attract clients who connect with your essence, and to charge prices aligned with what you truly deliver. The mask provides momentary applause, the self builds a legacy. Ultimately, persona and self are forces in tension. The persona is necessary. No one lives without a social mask, but when it dominates, you become a prisoner of other people's expectations. True profit begins when the persona becomes a tool, not a prison. When the self rules, you no longer need to beg for attention. People are drawn to the coherence you convey. And this is where the journey deepens even further, because to profit from being genuine, you must go beyond the mask and listen to the voice of your inner calling. The unique calling that, when followed, transforms work into a mission. Carl Jung believed that each individual carries within them a unique spark, something that sets them apart and pushes them beyond mediocrity. He called this an inner calling, a kind of psychic compass that points to the self. The ego often ignores this calling because it prefers security, while the persona tries to stifle it to keep up appearances. But spirituality shows that this calling doesn't disappear. It resurfaces as anxiety, boredom, or even psychosomatic illnesses. And in the practical world, this calling is precisely what can become a business, a career, and a sustainable income. What you were born to do isn't just a hobby, it's an economic asset. Examples are everywhere. An engineer who has always felt a passion for teaching can turn that inclination into online courses. A lawyer interested in spirituality can combine law and Jungian psychology to create transformative mentorships. An inner calling, when listened to, generates natural differentiation. And this is what the market pays for most: unique solutions created from real stories. Shadow work helps in this process because it reveals hidden talents precisely where you felt shame or pain. Often, your calling lies hidden in what you swore to hide. To put this into practice, a simple and brutally honest exercise is necessary. List activities that, when performed, make time pass without you realizing it. Then ask, how could I solve world problems using this? This bridge between internal pleasure and external utility is where vocation as a business is born. Jung said that archetypes bring universal symbols. When your vocation aligns with a clear archetype, The healer, the sage, the creator, you not only find purpose, but also create a magnetic personal brand. Your audience feels that you're not just selling, you're living your truth. Consider the example of someone who feels called to heal, but isn't a doctor. This individual can create a digital space for emotional support, combining shadow work with meditation practices. Or consider someone who has always been seen as too rebellious. This archetype can become a disruptive consulting business for companies that need to break mold. When your inner calling becomes work, there's no forced effort, there's flow. And this flow creates resilience to endure crises, because you're not just chasing money, but responding to a higher calling. The big point is that by following your calling, you naturally distance yourself from the imposed persona and draw closer to the self. This bothers those who expected you to be predictable, but delights those who feel a lack of authenticity in the world. Today's market, full of imitators, is thirsty for voices aligned with your inner truth. And that's where the next step becomes inevitable, learning to view the shadow not as an enemy, but as a resource. Because often, the most powerful talent of your calling is hidden precisely in what you've tried to reject your entire life. Carl Jung stated that everything we reject in ourselves ends up in the shadows. The ego prefers to sweep it under the rug. The persona tries to hide it with social masks, but the self knows it is precisely in this psychic basement that the greatest treasures lie. And here's the provocation. What you most fear showing may be exactly what can earn you the most money, impact, and authenticity. Think of someone who has always considered themselves too shy. Instead of trying to eliminate this characteristic, you can transform it into a resource. Create a communication method for introverts, for example. From weakness to difference, the shadow, when integrated, is creative capital. Spirituality teaches that there is no light without shadow, and the market shows that there is no innovation without discomfort. Many million-dollar businesses were born from personal pain. A young man who suffered from anxiety transforms his coping strategies into an online course. A woman who experienced abusive relationships creates a coaching movement focused on emotional healing. These stories resonate deeply because they aren't fabricated, they're real. Shadow work in this context isn't just therapy, it's a practical business strategy. It reveals the talents buried in trauma and converts them into authority. The world pays dearly to hear from someone who has walked where it still stumbles. Practical example. Imagine an artist who has always been called strange for his dark drawings. Instead of denying it, he decides to embrace this style and creates a clothing brand inspired by shadow archetypes: the rebel, the magician, the outlaw. The result? Consumers who feel invisible find representation and identity there. His shadow has become a mirror for the pain of others, and mirrors always sell. The key is to understand that vulnerability, when embraced, ceases to be weakness and becomes power. It's the inverse logic Jung saw. The scar is proof of survival, not defeat. To apply this in practice, it's helpful to write a list of the experiences you most avoid remembering. Then ask, what gifts were hidden there? Often anger transforms into leadership strength, loneliness into reflective capacity, rejection into deep empathy. Shadow work works like mining. You dig in dark places until you find precious stones. And when you do, you can polish them into products, services, and narratives. This isn't just personal healing, it's a business model. After all, those who buy from you aren't looking for perfection, but for humanity. The fascinating thing is that by using the shadow as a resource, you create an authenticity that no one can copy. Everyone can imitate your persona, but no one can replicate your integrated shadow because it is unique. This is where the invisible advantage emerges. You become remembered not only for what you do, but for what you represent. and this increases your authority, magnetism, and market value. But this journey doesn't end there, because if the shadow holds hidden treasures, personal history is the fabric that stitches it all together into something tangible. And it's about transforming your own narrative into a source of authority and impact that we need to talk about now. Carl Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but rather by becoming conscious of the darkness. This also applies to personal history. The ego often tries to hide the painful chapters. The persona prefers to show only the beautiful side, but it is the self who knows. It is precisely these scars that make it an authority. Think, who would you trust more to guide you in shadow work? Someone who only read spirituality books, or someone who faced their own demons and lived to tell the tale? Personal history builds credibility because it carries truth, and truth is magnetic. In the business world, great brands were born from personal stories. Oprah transformed abuse and trauma into a communications empire. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Man's Search for Meaning," after surviving concentration camps and inspired millions. These examples show that personal history is not just memory. It is an economic, spiritual, and psychological resource. When told consciously, it touches universal archetypes that resonate with everyone. And here's the practical detail. Your individual pain becomes a collective symbol, and symbols sell because they create belonging. Jung would explain this as the activation of the collective unconscious. The key is to organize your narrative. First, do an exercise. Divide your life into chapters as if it were a book. Mark the turning points, those moments when you were never the same again. Ask yourself, what lesson did I learn there that can help someone now? This simple writing process can become a script for a video, book, talk, or digital product. For example, someone who overcame bankruptcy could create financial mentorships. Someone who faced depression could build a community about mental health. The value lies in translating experience into solutions. This is how stories become impactful, and impact becomes revenue. And it's not just about sharing victories. Showing vulnerability also builds authority. When you talk about the nights you almost gave up, or the times your ego got the better of you and your persona failed, people don't see weakness. They see humanity. And humanity is the most powerful bridge of all. Shadow work here helps filter. You don't need to expose everything, but you do need to recognize what's worth using as an example. Those who share their journey without romanticizing it inspire more than those who pretend to be perfect gurus. The public doesn't seek unattainable heroes, but companions on the journey. Ultimately, your personal story is a legacy that can never be copied. Products can be replicated, techniques can be cloned, but your journey is unique. When you transform it into a conscious narrative, it becomes a shield against competition and a bridge to people's hearts. And best of all, the more aligned it is with the self, the more natural authority it generates. But there's something beyond the narrative, the silent energy it conveys. And this is where we enter a decisive point: authentic magnetism, that invisible force that attracts people and opportunities without artificial effort. Carl Jung said that what doesn't come from the soul never convinces. The ego may try to manipulate, the persona may strive to impress, but only the self generates true magnetism. And this magnetism isn't noise, it's silence. It's the energy you transmit when you're aligned with yourself. Have you ever noticed how some people walk into a room and everyone feels their presence, even without them saying a word? This isn't coincidence, it's coherence. Authentic magnetism is the sum of shadow work, lived spirituality, and integrated archetypes. There's no trick. It's a natural vibration that attracts what's compatible. In the market, this magnetism replaces the need to chase customers. Those who live on artificial effort are always chasing opportunities, begging for attention. Those who live aligned attract. Think of authors like Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, or even Eckhart Tolle. None of them desperately sought fame. They simply shared truths so profound that the world raced after them. This is authentic magnetism. When you become so real that people and opportunities want to orbit around you. And the most interesting detail, the market senses when you force versus when you flow. Want to put this into practice? Stop saying what you think sells and start saying what you truly experience. If you've studied spirituality but still struggle with your ego, talk about that struggle. If you teach shadow work, show that you also face your own shadow. This doesn't diminish authority, it enhances it. Because audiences connect more with those on the journey than with those pretending to have arrived. Authentic magnetism arises from vulnerability that finds balance in wisdom. And this balance is all too rare in times of masks, which makes it even more valuable. Another exercise, observe the moments when you felt the most genuine enthusiasm when talking about something. This energy is a sign of magnetism. Record videos in these states, write texts in this flow, create products based on this flame. People don't just buy information, they buy energy. If your energy is real, they come back. If it's rehearsed, they feel it and move away. Jung would say, this is the psyche responding to truth. That's why even small businesses, when guided by authentic magnetism, can compete with giants. It's not a matter of resources, but of vibration. The most fascinating thing is that authentic magnetism feeds back. The more you attract the right people, the more confident you become in showing your authenticity, and the more opportunities arise. This creates a virtuous cycle of abundance. But there's a detail many overlook. Magnetism without awareness of value can be wasted. It's not enough to attract. You need to understand how the public perceives that value. And this is precisely where Jung's psychology of value comes in, the profound insight that being authentic not only connects, but also increases your symbolic value in the world. Carl Jung explained that human beings respond to symbols more than to arguments. The ego believes value lies in price. The persona believes it lies in image, but the self knows value is perception. And perception arises from authenticity. When someone presents themselves genuinely, without disguise, it triggers an almost instinctive sense of trust in others. This is why certain professionals can charge more than their competitors, even offering the same service. It's not about what they do, but about who they are. The psychology of value shows that truth, when well communicated, becomes currency. See it in practice. 2 therapists offer online sessions. The first uses generic phrases, feigns perfection, and tries to appear more enlightened than he really is. The second talks about his own shadow work journey, shows vulnerability, quotes Carl Jung, and shares his downfalls and resurgences. Who generates more trust? The second. Perceived value skyrockets because the public recognizes humanity and coherence. This isn't theory, it's invisible marketing. Spirituality shows that the self doesn't need to prove anything, it just is. And this being communicates more than any persuasion technique. A simple exercise can increase this perception. Tell real stories instead of slogans. If you're an entrepreneur, tell how you overcame a crisis. If you work with spirituality, show how you integrate ego and persona into your daily life. When you position yourself this way, you awaken deep archetypes, the hero who overcame, the sage who learned, the healer who was reborn. The public pays not for the technique alone, but for the symbolism behind it. Jung would call this activating archetypal images, and business calls it storytelling. 2 names for the same key, generating value beyond logic. The psychology of value also explains why people are willing to pay fortunes for works of art, but not for a printed poster. It's not the paint, it's the creator's aura. Likewise, it's not just your product that matters, but what it carries of your history and your soul. When you offer something aligned with the self, that alignment is felt, even if unconsciously. The public pays more because they feel they're not buying an object or service, but part of a larger meaning. The persona may try to imitate this, but it never sustains it. Only the self can radiate lasting value. And here comes the most provocative point. Value isn't just about how much they charge you, but how you position yourself in the world. When someone lives aligned with spirituality, integrates shadow and archetypes into their narrative, and speaks from the self, they automatically become premium. There's no need to justify prices, no need to convince with effort. Value is already perceived before the transaction. But this perception can be further enhanced when one understands how to use symbols, myths, and creative narratives to make an impact, what we might call archetypal creativity, where Jung encounters the market in its most vivid form. Carl Jung always emphasized the power of archetypes as symbolic structures that shape our way of perceiving the world. The ego may believe that creativity is simply inventing something new, but true creativity comes from the ability to connect with universal symbols and translate them into contemporary language. The persona often tries to copy already accepted styles, but it is when the self accesses archetypal creativity that something memorable is born. Consider cinema, for example. The most memorable films are not just well-told stories, but narratives that activate collective archetypes, like the hero in Star Wars or the wizard in The Lord of the Rings. It's not just entertainment, it's income built on eternal symbols. In practice, archetypal creativity means using your own personal myths as raw material. Shadow work reveals these hidden stories, the ones you might not always want to expose, but which carry emotional power. Transforming your pain into narratives allows others to see themselves in you. If you've gone through a painful divorce, you could create content or even courses on emotional reconstruction. If your spiritual journey has led you to confront your ego, this could become a book, lecture, or online program. The key is to use symbols that resonate. Every personal experience contains archetypes waiting to be translated. A good example is the branding of large companies. Apple doesn't just sell technology, it sells the creator and visionary archetype. Nike doesn't sell sneakers, it sells the hero who pushes boundaries. This proves that archetypal creativity isn't just for artists, it's a business tool. If you're a coach, you can activate the sage archetype in your communication. If you're an entrepreneur, you can use the rebel to challenge market standards. When audiences feel that your narrative touches universal symbols, they don't just buy a product, they buy belonging. This belonging is the most valuable asset in today's economy. A practical exercise. Write down 3 moments in your life when you felt like you were living a myth. Perhaps a challenge in which you needed to be a hero, a crisis where the rebel emerged, or a spiritual discovery worthy of the magician. Then reflect. How can you transform this narrative into content, a product, or a service? For example, if you experienced a period of isolation and found wisdom in solitude, this could become a spiritual retreat or a series of videos on self-discovery. Archetypal creativity shows that your life is an inexhaustible source of raw material. You just need to recognize the symbols hidden in each experience. The most fascinating thing is that when you create from archetypes, the impact goes beyond the rationale. The audience doesn't just understand your message, they feel it. And feeling is what transforms interest into loyalty. Jung said that myths are expressions of the collective soul, and using them in your narrative is like speaking the secret language of the human unconscious. The result? Deep connection, lasting impact, and consequently, sustainable income. But this creative journey doesn't end there, because there's a bigger shift happening in the world. The future of work, which is no longer rewarding conformity, but rewarding precisely those who have the courage to be authentic. Carl Jung may never have imagined the digital market, but his view on ego, persona, and self perfectly explains today's economy. Traditional work rewarded the persona, obedience, repetition, predictability. But the future, which is already here, is rewarding those who dare to be authentic. The ego tries to stay safe in fixed positions, but the self demands expression. And in this new scenario, those who demonstrate vulnerability, spirituality, and shadow work applied to real life attract opportunities that a resume could never deliver. Companies don't just want employees, they want individuals with stories, living archetypes, and clear differentiators. Authenticity has become the most valued currency. Consider the digital nomads, content creators, and entrepreneurs of the new economy. They don't survive by following old rules, but by daring to transform their uniqueness into market value. A writer who blends Jungian psychology with humor attracts a specific audience and monetizes it. A therapist who embraces her own wounds creates a healing space that builds client loyalty. What was once a source of shame is now a competitive differentiator. Shadow work is no longer just introspection and has become a practical tool for innovation. The future of work belongs not to those who copy, but to those who dare to be original. This movement is also reflected in how the economy values symbols. The creator archetype dominates design and storytelling platforms. The sage archetype is present in consulting and mentoring, and the rebel archetype is present in startups that challenge large corporations. Carl Jung would explain this as the collective psyche seeking new representations in the market, and the detail is brutal. Those who insist on being the same end up discarded, replaced by artificial intelligence or automated processes. But those who embrace their uniqueness, aligned with the self, become irreplaceable. Technology copies, but does not create a soul. Soul is a human asset, and it is increasingly expensive. Want to apply this now? Ask yourself, what in my work is just repetition and could be done by a machine? And what can only I offer because it comes from my history, my archetypes, my integrated shadow? This exercise is simple, but it separates those who will have a future from those who will be stuck in the past. For example, automated reports can already be produced by AI, but human interpretation, based on real experiences, will never be replaced. A mentor who has experienced an existential crisis and speaks about it authentically will always be more valuable than an instruction manual. That's what the market is buying: humanity. The future of work, therefore, will not be guided by conformity, but by courage. The courage to abandon the social persona that only seeks approval and to delve into the self, where authenticity resides. Those who dare to be different will not only survive, but thrive in a world where copying has become a commodity. Jung would remind us that individuation is the inevitable path of the soul, and now it is also the inevitable path of the market. And it is precisely at this point that our journey hinges, understanding that making money by being yourself is not utopia, but strategy. And that Jung, long ago, already laid out the signs for this journey. Do you realize now that everything they tried to teach you about playing it safe is nothing more than an illusion? Carl Jung warned, the price of the persona is the loss of the soul. And in the market, the loss of the soul also means the loss of value. The world no longer wants copies, it wants living symbols. It wants people who have the courage to expose their ego, their shadow, their archetypes, and transform them into a competitive advantage. The question is, how long will you hide your uniqueness? How long will you accept crumbs, while those who show their true selves demand a high price and are still respected for it? If authenticity has become currency, will you continue to spend energy trying to fit in, or will you invest in being unique? Now it's your turn to apply. What part of your story can be transformed into authority? What pain can become a product? What shadow can become a creative resource? Think about it. Answer in the comments, because there is no transformation without action, and there is no action without decision. This channel is here to be your space of breakthrough, not comfort. If something within you has awakened, then it's a sign that it's past time to move on. Sign up now, turn on notifications, and keep learning how to make money by being yourself. Because authenticity isn't just spirituality, it's strategy.